They laughed when I told them I wanted to major in economics. They called it useless, a waste of tuition, something only bookworms who'd never survive in the real world would do. My dad shook his head. My brother cracked jokes. My mom said I should have just gone into nursing, like my cousins. I swallowed their words, pretended I didn't care, but inside, I promised myself one thing. If they thought my degree was worthless, I'd prove its value in ways they couldn't ignore. What none of them realized was that the same useless degree would one day become my weapon. And the day came when the very people who mocked me showed up at my office, needing my help, only to realize they couldn't even afford the fee. I was 18 when I declared that I wanted to major in economics. I still remember the exact moment I told my family. It was a Sunday dinner, the kind where my mom made her famous pot roast, my dad was flipping through the newspaper even as he ate, and my brother Josh had his phone glued to his hand like always. I had been practicing the sentence in my head all afternoon. I'm going to study economics. Simple, straightforward. But when I said it out loud, the reaction was anything but simple. First, silence. My mom's fork clinked against her plate. My dad lowered his paper slowly, peering at me over the rim of his glasses as though he wasn't sure he'd heard correctly. Josh, he nearly choked on his water before bursting into laughter. Economics? He wheezed between coughs and chuckles. What are you gonna do, explain why I'm broke? Draw graphs for a living? My dad chuckled too, though it was less playful and more condescending. Honey, he said to my mom, shaking his head, our daughter wants to spend 4 years learning something no employer cares about. I felt the blood rush to my cheeks. I tried to stay calm, to defend myself. Economics isn't useless, I said in a voice that was a little too sharp. It's the foundation of how businesses, governments, and markets function. It's not just about numbers. It's about decision-making, strategy. Strategy? Josh cut in, still smirking. What strategy? Like how to budget your allowance? I swear you could just Google that stuff for free. Even my mom, who usually tried to stay neutral, sighed and said, Sweetheart, why not something more practical? Nursing, maybe? Or accounting? At least those lead to jobs. Their words stung because they came from the people I wanted to impress the most. I wanted my family to see me as ambitious, intelligent, capable of doing something big. Instead, they made me feel like a little kid bragging about wanting to be an astronaut. That night, alone in my room, I replayed the dinner scene over and over. Their laughter, their dismissive tones, the way my dad shook his head like I'd already failed before I'd even started. I clenched my fists under the covers and whispered into the dark, I'll prove them wrong. College wasn't easy, not because of the workload. I actually loved my classes. Microeconomics, macro, game theory, behavioral economics. I devoured it all. What was hard was living under the shadow of my family's doubt. Every phone call home carried the same undertone. How are you really going to use this degree? My dad would ask. Still studying that math stuff? Josh would sneer. My mom would try to soften it, but even her words weren't comforting. I just don't want you to struggle, honey. You're smart, but sometimes smart people make impractical choices. Impractical. That word haunted me. There were nights I cried quietly in my dorm room, wondering if maybe they were right. Maybe I was wasting my time. Maybe I should have gone into something safe. But then I'd think about why I chose economics in the first place. Because it fascinated me. Because when I looked at the world, markets crashing, policy shifting, businesses rising and falling, I wanted to understand the why. I threw myself into my studies with a kind of desperate determination. While others crammed last minute, I read beyond the syllabus. I joined debates, presented papers at student conferences, and spent hours with professors who saw potential in me, even if my family didn't. Still, the doubt lingered. The first Christmas break after starting college, I came home proud of my straight-A semester. I was practically glowing as I sat down at the dinner table, waiting for someone to ask. And when they finally did, when my dad said, "So, how's school?" I smiled and said, "Great, I got top marks in all my classes." Josh snorted. "Congrats, you're the top nerd in a class full of nerds studying something no one cares about." My dad gave a half smile. Grades are fine, but they don't pay bills. And my mom, she patted my hand and said, "We're proud of you, honey, but maybe think about minoring in something more employable." It felt like a punch to the gut. I'd come home expecting applause, maybe even validation. Instead, it was more of the same. That night, I lay awake in my childhood bed, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars still stuck to the ceiling from when I was 12. I thought about how small they made me feel, and I made another promise to myself. One day, they won't laugh. One day, they'll wish they took me seriously. By junior year, things started to shift. I landed a coveted internship at a consulting firm. It was intense. Long hours, complex cases, real clients, but I loved it. For the first time, I wasn't just learning theory, I was applying it. My boss even pulled me aside one day and said, "You've got a sharp mind. You're gonna go far if you stick with this." I wanted to scream those words at my family. Instead, I shared the news over the phone, expecting at least some excitement. My dad's reaction was, "Consulting, huh? So you're basically someone's assistant." Josh laughed and said, "So they're paying you to be a know-it-all? Figures." My mom's voice was soft, but not enthusiastic. "That sounds nice, honey, but internships don't always lead to jobs. Don't get your hopes up." That call left me shaking. No matter what I achieved, it felt like it would never be enough. But maybe, just maybe, their dismissal fueled me, because every time they doubted me, I worked harder. I took on extra projects, I volunteered for late nights, I studied successful consultants, mimicked their confidence, learned their strategies. Slowly, I stopped caring about whether my family believed in me. I started caring about proving something to myself. By the time graduation rolled around, I had not only earned my degree with honors, but also secured a full-time consulting offer with the same firm. It was the kind of job my classmates dreamed about, high-paying, fast-paced, with room to grow. I remember walking across that stage in my cap and gown, hearing my name called, shaking the dean's hand and smiling for the camera. And when I scanned the crowd searching for my family, I saw empty seats. They hadn't even come. That more than anything broke me. They hadn't thought my degree was worth anything, so they hadn't bothered to show up for the culmination of years of sweat and sacrifice. But as I held my diploma, something inside me shifted. Their absence didn't mean I wasn't enough. It meant they weren't capable of seeing my worth. And one day, I promised myself the world would make them see what they refused to see. That was the seed of everything that came next. Because I knew in that moment, I wouldn't just succeed, I'd thrive. I'd build a career so undeniable that the same people who mocked me would have no choice but to acknowledge me. They thought economics was useless. They thought my degree was worthless. But little did they know that worthless degree would one day build me into the kind of professional they couldn't even afford. And when that day came, oh, how the tables would turn. After graduation, I thought maybe, just maybe, my family would finally see me differently. I had a job lined up at a respected consulting firm. I was making more money than most entry-level positions. I had earned it. Surely that would change something. But the first time I came home with news of my new salary, the reaction wasn't pride. It was mockery. I was sitting in the living room, fresh in my new work clothes, tailored suit, crisp white shirt, heels that made my feet ache but boosted my confidence tenfold. I told them about my job offer. I mentioned the salary, which was far higher than anything Josh had ever earned at his warehouse gig. And what did he do? He burst out laughing. Wait. They're paying you that much? To do what? Sit in an office and tell people what they already know? Man, I need to switch careers. My dad chuckled along. I don't know who these companies hire nowadays, paying kids fresh out of school to give advice they haven't lived enough life to even understand. It's ridiculous. And my mom? She gave me that same worried look she always did. Sweetheart, are you sure it's stable? These companies sometimes use young people, then replace them when they burn out. Don't get too comfortable. I sat there, my smile fading. I wanted them to say they were proud of me, that they believed in me. Instead, they made me feel like a fraud, like my success wasn't real. That night, I locked myself in my old room, stared at the ceiling, and thought, why do I keep expecting them to change? Why do I keep expecting their validation when I already know what they'll say? The truth was, they weren't going to change. But I could. At work, I threw myself into projects. The firm was grueling, but I thrived under the pressure. Clients were demanding, deadlines brutal, but for once, I felt alive. Each presentation, each successful case gave me confidence. And yet, every time I saw my family, the same cycle repeated. One Thanksgiving, Josh made a big show of announcing that he had gotten a used car. Everyone congratulated him, cheered, clapped. When it was my turn to share something, I mentioned that I had just been promoted to associate consultant. The reaction? Silence. Then Josh cracked, promoted to what? Head of staplers? Everyone laughed. I laughed too, but it wasn't real. Inside, my heart burned. I realized then that it wasn't about them not understanding what I did. It was about them not wanting to. My achievements didn't fit their narrative of who I was supposed to be. To them, I was the bookish kid, the dreamer who chose something impractical. If they acknowledged my success, they'd have to admit they were wrong, and they weren't willing to do that. The mockery didn't just stop at family gatherings. Word spread in our small community. I'd overhear whispers. Consulting? What even is that? Must be nice to sit at a desk all day. Her degree isn't real work. She should have done something useful. The judgment was constant, and though I tried to shrug it off, part of me carried it like a weight. But here's the thing. When the world doubted me, I worked harder. I spent late nights in the office poring over case studies, learning from senior partners, studying markets until my eyes blurred. I attended seminars, read books, listened to podcasts about business, strategy, and negotiation. I didn't just want to be good. I wanted to be exceptional. There were moments I doubted myself, moments when a presentation didn't land, or when a client pushed back hard. But each step back only sharpened me. Where others saw failure, I saw feedback. And slowly, my reputation grew. By the end of my second year, I wasn't just another associate. I was the one clients specifically requested. I had a knack for breaking down complex problems into simple, actionable steps. I could see patterns others missed. I could read a room, sense hesitation, and pivot my approach mid-sentence. Still, none of that mattered at home. I remember one night vividly. I was exhausted, having just wrapped a 3-month project that ended in a multi-million-dollar deal for a client. My boss had praised me in front of the entire firm. I should have been celebrating. But when I called my parents to share the news, my dad said, "So basically you made rich people richer? That's what you're proud of?" Josh added, "Man, I could do your job. Just say some fancy words, make a PowerPoint, and boom, easy money." I hung up that call and cried. Not because I believed them, but because I hated how much their opinions still mattered to me. Around that time, I made a decision. I wouldn't just be an employee forever. I'd build something of my own, something undeniable. I started freelancing on the side, taking small clients who couldn't afford the firm's fees. I helped struggling startups, small business owners, even solo entrepreneurs. And to my surprise, I loved it even more than corporate consulting. These weren't faceless corporations. They were real people with dreams, and I was helping them survive. Word spread fast. My side business grew, and soon I had more requests than I could handle. Eventually, I faced a choice: stay at the firm or take the leap into building my own consultancy. It wasn't easy, but I chose the leap. My family, of course, laughed. "You're quitting a good job. For what? To play pretend consultant in your apartment?" My dad scoffed. Josh added, "You'll be crawling back in a month when you realize no one needs you." But I didn't crawl back. I hustled. I networked. I poured every ounce of energy into my business. I built a website, created case studies, invested in marketing, and offered free workshops to get my name out. Slowly, steadily, it grew. And then came the big client. A mid-sized company on the brink of collapse hired me. I worked with them for 6 months, restructuring their processes, cutting costs, and improving efficiency. By the end, not only were they profitable, they were expanding. The CEO called me a miracle worker, and he referred me to 3 other businesses. That was the beginning. As my consulting practice took off, I found myself living a double life. At home, I was still the butt of the joke. Miss Economics, saving the world one pie chart at a time, Josh would sneer. My dad would ask, "So, how many clients today? Any real ones or just the mom and pop shops?" But out, I was becoming a name in the industry. I was invited to conferences, interviewed on podcasts, and even published in respected journals. Clients lined up, willing to pay premium fees for my services. It was surreal. I'd sit at family dinners, listening to them mock me, all while knowing that I had just signed a contract worth more than their annual salaries combined. It wasn't about the money. It was about the shift. For the first time, I knew I didn't need their validation. But life has a funny way of circling back, because soon the very people who mocked me would come knocking at my door. And that was when the tables truly turned. Success didn't happen overnight. It never does. But within a few years, my small consulting business had grown into something far bigger than I ever imagined. At first, it was just me working out of my tiny apartment with a cheap laptop and an old desk that wobbled every time I typed. But as word spread, my client list kept expanding. Eventually, I had to hire assistants, then junior consultants. Then I leased an office, small but professional. By the 5th year, I wasn't just doing okay, I was thriving. I had a team of 20 people, a steady stream of clients, and a reputation that extended far beyond my city. My speaking gigs turned into paid keynotes. I was flying across the country to advise executives. And each time I signed a contract, I couldn't help but think back to every smirk, every laugh, every dismissive comment from my family. It started with small things. One Sunday afternoon, I got a call from my brother Josh. We hadn't spoken in months, not since the last family barbecue where he mocked me for pretending to be a CEO. "Hey," he said, his voice strangely soft. Listen, my wife and I were having some money troubles. I was wondering if maybe you could help us figure things out, like with your business brain." I froze. Was this the same brother who used to call my degree worthless paper? Part of me wanted to laugh in his face, but another part of me, the professional part, kicked in. I asked questions, listened carefully, and sure enough, their finances were a mess. Overspending, no budget, loans piling up. "Josh," I said carefully, "this isn't something I can just fix with a magic trick. You and your wife need a financial plan. You need discipline." He didn't like hearing that. He got defensive. "So what, you're too good to help your own brother now? Thought you were supposed to be some genius consultant." I wanted to scream, "You never believed in me. You mocked me for years." But instead, I kept my cool. "I am a consultant, Josh, which means if you want my help, it's going to take real work, and it's not free." There was silence on the line. Then he muttered, "Forget it," and hung up. That was the first crack in their facade. The first time they realized maybe, just maybe, I wasn't a joke. A few months later, my dad called. Now, my father is the kind of man who never admits when he's wrong, the kind who will double down on his opinion even when the truth is staring him in the face. So when I saw his name on my phone, I knew something serious had happened. "Clara, listen, the factory's cutting hours. They're saying layoffs might be coming. I don't know what I'm gonna do. You think you could take a look at my resume? Maybe advise me on finding something else? For a moment, I didn't know what to say. This was the man who had once laughed at my graduation speech, who had called my degree a waste of money, and now he wanted my help. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Of course, Dad, send me your resume. I'll take a look. That night, as I read through his outdated, messy document, I felt a swirl of emotions: anger, sadness, vindication. But more than anything, I felt power. For the first time in my life, I held the upper hand. The true turning point came when I landed a massive contract with a Fortune 500 company. They were struggling with a failing division, losing millions every quarter. After months of negotiations, they hired me and my firm. I worked around the clock, leading a team that dissected their operations, restructured departments, and implemented new strategies. It was the hardest project of my life, but it paid off, literally. 6 months later, their losses had turned into record-breaking profits. The CEO himself shook my hand and said, "You've saved this company. Whatever we paid you, it wasn't enough." And what they paid me was more money than my parents had earned in a decade combined. That contract put my firm on the map. Suddenly, every company wanted Clara, the consultant who could turn disaster into success. The next family gathering was different. For the first time ever, instead of mocking me, they asked questions, tentative ones at first. "So, Clara, you're really traveling a lot, huh, Josh?" asked Josh, chewing his food nervously. "Yeah," I said simply. "Just got back from New York, had a meeting with some big clients." My dad chimed in, "And these clients, they actually listen to you? Like, they take your advice?" I nodded. "They do, and they pay well for it." There was a pause. Then, for the first time in my life, I saw something new in their eyes. Not mockery, not dismissal, but something closer to respect. Of course, Josh couldn't resist a jab. "Well, must be nice. Bet you're rolling in cash now, huh?" But his laugh was hollow, forced. He knew the tables had turned. It was about a year later when the shift became undeniable. Josh showed up at my office one afternoon looking pale and nervous. His business, a small construction company, was on the verge of bankruptcy. "Clara," he said, almost whispering, I need your help, please. I don't know what else to do." I looked at him across my polished desk, my diploma framed proudly on the wall behind me, the same diploma he had once mocked. For a long moment, I said nothing. Just let the silence stretch. I could see the shame on his face, the desperation in his eyes. Finally, I leaned forward. "Josh, do you remember what you used to say about my degree? About my work?" He winced. "Yeah, I was wrong, okay? I get it now. Please, just help me." That was the moment I realized the mockery was over. I had won. I did help him on one condition, that he pay my consulting fee, the same rate I charged any other client. At first he balked. "You'd charge your own brother?" I smiled coldly. "You wanted me to take my work seriously, right? This is how I do that." And when he wrote that check, when he handed me money he could barely spare, I felt a satisfaction so deep it was almost dangerous. Because this was what they never expected. The girl they mocked, the degree they dismissed, the dream they laughed at. It had all led me here, and now they couldn't afford me. It's strange how quickly life can flip. One day you're the family's black sheep, the butt of every joke, the one they point to as an example of what not to be, and then, suddenly, you're the only one they can't survive without. That was my reality now. The real shift became crystal clear at Christmas. Every year, our family tradition was the same. Dinner at my parents' house, gift exchanges, and a whole lot of passive-aggressive commentary about my life. But this year was different. When I walked through the door, everyone's eyes turned to me. Not with mockery, not with disdain, but with a strange mix of curiosity and expectation. "Clara," my mom exclaimed, rushing forward to hug me, "we're so glad you could make it." She had never greeted me like that before. Ever. Josh handed me a glass of wine. My sister-in-law asked me about my travels. My dad even pulled out a chair at the table, like I was some honored guest. For the first time, I felt like royalty in a house where I'd once been invisible. And then the conversation began. "So, Clara," Josh said carefully, "I was thinking, maybe you could take a look at our investment portfolio, just to make sure we're making the right choices." My dad chimed in. "Yeah, and maybe you could help me figure out how to restructure my retirement plan. They're cutting pensions at work and, well, I could use an expert's eye." I looked around the table. One by one, every single person was asking for my help. My family, the same people who had mocked me relentlessly, now treated me like their personal lifeline. And I knew, without a doubt, I had the power. But here's the thing. Success had taught me something important. Boundaries matter. So when they asked for my help, I smiled politely and said, "Of course, but you'll need to schedule an appointment with my office." They blinked at me. "Your office?" my dad repeated. "Yes," I said firmly. "I don't do consulting at the dinner table. If you want my professional expertise, you'll go through the proper channels, just like everyone else." Josh frowned. "So we'd have to pay you?" I took a slow sip of my wine. "That's how consulting works." The silence that followed was delicious. For years, they had treated me like I wasn't worth a dime. Now they were realizing that every word I spoke carried a price tag. It didn't take long before the appointments started coming in. Josh booked me first. His construction business was bleeding money faster than he could keep up with. Employees were quitting, clients weren't paying. He was desperate. When he walked into my sleek downtown office, I could see the discomfort all over his face. The polished glass, the buzzing team of analysts, my name etched on the door, it all screamed of a world he didn't belong to. "Clara," he muttered, sinking into the chair across from me, "I still can't believe this is you." I smiled professionally. "Well, believe it. Now, let's talk about your company." For the next hour, I laid out a full restructuring plan. Hard truths, tough advice, no sugarcoating. At the end, I slid the invoice across the desk. He swallowed hard. "That much?" I said smoothly. "That's my rate, and it's non-negotiable." Watching him write the check was like watching the universe correct itself. For every time he laughed at me, dismissed me, treated me like a fool, this was the repayment. A month later, it was my dad who came to me. He looked older, smaller somehow, sitting in the leather chair across from me. His factory had announced mass layoffs. After decades of loyal work, he was on the chopping block. "I don't know what to do, Clara," he admitted quietly. "I thought I had time. Thought I was safe. But now, I'm not sure I can even afford the house." I leaned back, studying him. This was the same man who had once told me my degree was worthless, who had said I should get a real job. And now, he was begging for my help. "Dad," I said softly, "I'll help you, but you need to understand something. You mocked me for years. You told me I'd never amount to anything. You dismissed everything I worked for. And yet, here you are, depending on me to save you." He flinched. His eyes dropped to the floor. For once, the prideful man I'd grown up with had nothing to say. It was the moment I'd been waiting for all my life. It wasn't just my family coming to me anymore. Word had spread in our town. Local businesses, friends of my parents, even distant relatives, they all wanted Clara, the consultant who had made it big. I couldn't walk into a grocery store without someone stopping me. "Hey, Clara, could you take a look at my business plan? Just a few minutes?" But unlike before, I wasn't desperate for approval. I didn't need their validation, because now
I had something more powerful than their opinions. I had results. The peak of my journey came when I was invited to speak at a global business conference. Thousands of executives, entrepreneurs, and investors gathered to hear insights from the top minds in the industry. I was one of the keynote speakers. Standing on that massive stage, looking out at the sea of faces, I felt a surge of pride. I wasn't just the girl with the useless degree anymore. I was Clara, the consultant, the strategist, the expert people paid fortunes to hear. And in the audience, sitting stiffly in the front row, were my parents and my brother. They had begged for tickets. They wanted to see me in my element. As I spoke, confident, commanding, respected, I watched their faces, the realization dawning on them, the understanding that the daughter they had mocked, the sister they had belittled, had become something they could never ignore. By the time I finished, the audience erupted into applause. People stood on their feet, clapping, cheering. And my family? They clapped too, but their smiles were tight, their eyes wide with something between awe and regret. It was after the conference, at dinner, when my dad finally said the words I thought I'd never hear. "Clara," he said slowly, his voice thick, "I was wrong. About you, about your degree, about everything. I didn't see it before, but you've built something incredible, and I couldn't be prouder." The table went silent. Josh muttered, "Yeah, I didn't get it either. Guess I was just jealous. You proved us all wrong." I looked at them, my chest tight. For years I had dreamed of this moment, of them acknowledging my worth. And now that it was here, it didn't feel like triumph. It felt like closure. Because I didn't need their approval anymore. I had already won. In the weeks that followed, my family leaned on me more than ever. Business advice, financial guidance, even personal coaching. And every time they came to me, every time they handed over a check, every time they admitted they couldn't move forward without me, I felt that quiet satisfaction. Not loud, not gloating, just quiet. Because the ultimate revenge isn't screaming, "I told you so." It's living so successfully that the people who doubted you can't survive without you. And that's exactly what I had done.
The night after the conference, I sat in my apartment, the city lights spilling through the window, a glass of wine in my hand. The applause still rang in my ears, but what lingered even more was the look on my family's faces. It was the look of people who had finally realized the truth they had ignored for years. I wasn't the failure. I wasn't the one who wasted her time on a useless degree. I was the one who had risen above them all. And now, they couldn't escape it. I thought back to all those years when I sat in my childhood bedroom, listening to my father call me a dreamer, hearing my brother laugh at me behind my back, hearing relatives whisper about how Clara would never make it. I remembered crying into my pillow, questioning whether they were right, whether maybe I had made a mistake. But here I was, sipping wine in a high-rise apartment, my phone buzzing with new client inquiries every single day. My past was full of ridicule, but my present was undeniable proof that I had chosen the right path. And that night, I realized something important. I didn't need them to say they were wrong, because their actions had already proved it. Weeks passed, and my life only grew busier. The more people saw me succeed, the more they wanted me. Companies booked me months in advance. Conferences wanted me as a headline speaker. Universities reached out, asking if I would come and lecture about the very degree my family had once mocked. And every single time I stepped onto a stage, I thought of that little girl I once was, the one who felt small, unwanted, and dismissed. She was still inside me, but now she was smiling. My family, though, their smiles had faded. Josh's business survived because of my advice, but he hated writing those checks every month. My father's retirement became stable because of the plan I created. but he avoided eye contact whenever he handed me his consulting fee. My mother tried to soften the blow by cooking for me, by asking about my day, but I could see it in her eyes, regret. They hadn't just underestimated me, they had crushed me when I was most vulnerable, and no amount of money or success could erase the scars they left. It was my birthday when the final proof of change arrived. For years, birthdays were painful. They were afterthoughts in my family. A quick card, maybe a sweater if they remembered, nothing special. But this year, I came home to a package at my door. Inside was a handwritten card from my dad. The words were clumsy, awkward, but honest. Clara, I know I wasn't the father you needed when you were younger. I see now how wrong I was. You've built something remarkable, and I'm sorry for every time I made you feel small. I hope someday you can forgive me. I read it 3 times. My throat tightened. Part of me wanted to cry, to finally let the years of pain out. Another part of me wanted to laugh, because it had taken my success, my money, my power for him to finally see me. I didn't forgive him that day. Maybe I never fully will. But I tucked the card away because it meant something. Not for him, for me. It was proof that I had always been enough. The strangest part came later when I walked back into my old childhood home. The walls looked smaller, the rooms duller, the air heavier. Everything I once thought was permanent now felt temporary. My dad tried to boast to his friends that Clara's our genius daughter. She runs this big firm in the city. My mother hovered over me, asking if I wanted more food. Josh, surprisingly, kept his distance, maybe because he couldn't stand being reminded of his dependence on me. And as I looked around that room, I realized something. I didn't need their validation anymore. I didn't need their apologies, their pride, or even their company. I had built a life that stood on its own. I had built it without them. The final shift came when I bought a home. Not just any home, but one in the heart of the city, overlooking everything I once thought was out of reach. It wasn't just a house. It was a symbol. Every brick, every piece of furniture, every window was mine, earned by the degree they once said was worthless. When my parents visited for the first time, I could see the awe in their eyes. My mother ran her hands across the marble countertop. My father stood silently by the window, staring at the skyline. They didn't say much that day, but they didn't need to. The silence said it all. They knew I had won. And yet, it didn't feel like winning against them anymore. It felt like winning for me. For the girl who once stayed up all night studying while her family laughed at her. For the woman who cried herself to sleep after being told she wasn't good enough. For the dreamer who chose her own path even when everyone else said she'd fail. This wasn't revenge. This was redemption. And the best part? Now when people asked me about my story, I didn't talk about the degree or the business or the clients. I told them about resilience, about not letting the voices of doubt drown out the fire inside you, about believing in yourself, even when no one else does. Because in the end, it wasn't my family's words that defined me. It was mine. And now, when they sit across from me at the dinner table, carefully measuring their words, respecting the boundaries they once trampled, I smile to myself. Not because I needed to prove them wrong, but because I proved myself right.